going to post it in the D2L content area for student teaching. So you will have the benefit as you're going through this and you're trying to remember what did Rhonda tell us about this, you can rewind me and play me again. So that way, hopefully, if you can't remember the answers to something, you can go back and take a look at it later. So, okay, so this is your TPA support group. And hopefully you recognize a few of these things. The main three elements that are in the TPA, the planning task, the instruction task, and the assessment task. Within each of those tasks, there are certain things that they are looking for. I'm trying to move this down just a little further so it all gets on. That academic language you see tied into everything, where you're using data to decide what you should be doing once you do the analysis, what would your next steps be, you justify your planning decisions, you analyze your teaching, all those other little things that are part of the commentaries as you go. So what you'll see in the circles here are actually what the headings are for each of the rubrics that everybody has. So they are specific to, are you doing math or literacy or science or social studies, whatever, but everybody has something in those rubrics that relate to those things. So they are consistent across the different fields. So within the TPA, so task 1, it has the instructional and social context. So this is your context for learning. You need to be really careful filling out that form. It seems like very routine stuff, and it pretty much is. But think in terms of the person who's seeing this to score it, okay? Scorers will be from Minnesota. They will not be from SMSU. They are teachers who've got a master's degree, have taught for at least 3 years in your content area. So social studies will get social studies and so on. They have to be specific to that field. And so what they're looking for and what they need on your context is kind of tell them about where are you at without telling them where are you at, okay? So I'm in a rural school in 2nd grade. I've got 23 students, this many boys, this many girls. If you're doing literacy, what is your textbook or your series that they're using? What resources do you have? Do you have a smart board? Do you have iPads? What do you have available in your school? Do they do kind of a guided reading program? Do they have groupings? Any of those kinds of things that tell them about the context of your school are the kinds of things you want to let that scorer know about, so that when you're explaining things in their commentary, they're like, oh, okay, I know this because I saw, this is what they told me in their context. So you need to kind of explain just where you are and what's going on. The other really big piece that has to go in your context for learning is that bottom section that talks about anybody on a 504 plan, an IEP, with an ESL designation, any students that have any kind of the alphabet soup attached to them, any special needs of any type. You need to list them. You don't put their name, you say, like I've got 2 students that are LD and in this area, and here's what the accommodations or modifications are for that student. So you need to list them on that form. So, Shelley?
Foreign exchange students would go in there also?
Probably. I mean, you could just list them that, because the thing is too, now if I'm in your English class and I'm I'm seeing the videotape and I'm scoring this, and I see this student and you haven't mentioned anything about someone who's not a native English speaker, but they've got a pretty heavy German accent, I'm like, where did that student come from and why aren't they on your list? Okay. One of the biggest things, there are a couple automatic fails on the TPA, and they're for pretty drastic things, but in particular, it's not addressing the needs of students on an IEP. That is a legal mandate. So if you've got students on an IEP in your classroom and you don't say, what am I doing to help these students, that's a big problem. So you have to have that in there. So,
how about if you don't have any students on an IEP or anything? If you don't have any and it's not in there?
Then you just make sure you say that. Later on in the commentaries, it'll ask you some kind of pointed questions, and you just say, I don't have any students on an IEP. And they'll, when they're not in your context, that should tell them as well.
Okay.
The one thing that's hard about that is on some of the rubrics, it's actually hard to score well if you don't have a student with something. Because they ask you, what are you doing to make things more approachable for that student? So you're going to really want to focus on, no matter what class you've got kids who struggle, you've got high flyers, that maybe they're not identified and they don't have a label, but that's okay. Here's what I do for this struggling reader in my class, even though they're not, Title I qualified or whatever, okay? So that's really how you address that without there being a specific label. So, Shelley?
Do we need to include students who have an IEP, but it's not for learning issue. I have a student who has a serious medical condition that fits, but it
Okay.
doesn't affect their learning in any ways, as far as I've been told.
Sure. So it's really probably more of a 504 thing. That's
It's an
usually-
IEP.
They do have an IEP, okay, because usually medical things like that, if it doesn't affect their learning, might go one to the other. Noted on the context for learning.
Okay,
But then I would say when it comes to those sections and they're asking you the questions, you can just say, no accommodations were needed,
okay.
at this time, that kind of thing. One thing I will mention here, because I might forget later, suppose your student does have an IEP and they've got a para in the room, okay? Saying the para will support this student is not gonna score well, because who's responsible for that student's instruction? You or the para? You are. So all it takes is a sentence there saying, I laid out some main goals for the student today in this lesson, and I gave them to the para. Here's what they're going to work on. Just identifying that, yeah, I am working with this para, and I'm giving them what they need, and we are in collaboration. It doesn't take a paragraph, a sentence or so, just saying I am, and not just, this is the para's problem. I'm not going to deal with this kid. You have to be kind of careful how it comes across. So
What if the school is structured so that they work with paras outside of classroom?
there too, hopefully you're providing some curriculum to the resource room saying, and you can say that, it's like, okay, this student goes to the resource room outside of class, so I'm providing this curriculum for them to use, and I work with them on that. And again, like a sentence or two is often all it takes to just make sure that everybody's aware this is identified, so. Yep.
I've already videotaped my lesson, and in part of the lesson, I'm working with a child who was just having a really bad day. He has some
Yep.
issues, but it's not anything that's been diagnosed. He doesn't have an IEP. And he had kind of a meltdown, and so I'm sitting in and the teacher did a really good job videoing it, but I'm really giving him some individual instruction and working with them. Should I leave that on there or take that out then if there's
I
not an
would leave it,
IEP
'cause
with
you know
them?
what, these people scoring this have been real life classroom teachers, they know
Okay.
this happens.
Right, okay.
If you have the perfect hunky-dory classroom, they're gonna go, where are you?
Right.
Where did you find this class and how do I get there?
Yeah, because he actually had a meltdown before that class,
Yeah.
that instruction
So-
started, and so it kind of carried over, as we all know.
Right,
it does.
and what you want to do is make sure you mention that in your commentary.
Okay,
You know
mention
what,
it,
this
okay.
student had a meltdown right before this, because that's part of your commentary, they're gonna ask you what happened before this, what did you
Sure.
do after, because they're only seeing that little clip.
Right.
So tell them that, here's what happened, and that's why you see me doing this, and then you can actually talk about, okay, here's
Okay.
what I did, and what my
Sure.
goals were, and how did that go,
Okay.
That's another thing people worry about with the videotaping. It's like, well, what if class did not go great the day I videotaped? And this is what I got. It's okay. What they really want to see is what did you learn from that?
Yeah.
What are your next steps going to be? It's like, okay, I did this lesson, and you know what? It bombed. They did not get quadratic formula at all. Okay, what am I going to do tomorrow when I go back? What are my steps? Do I just leave them in the dust and we keep on going? Hopefully not. What's the plan B to remediate this? And this one didn't work, so now what am I going to do?
Okay.
And that's okay. That actually scores well.
Okay, all right.
So, plan to fail. No, don't do that. But I say, that isn't the part that's important.
Okay.
So,
All right.
okay? So, that's your basic things, kind of tells you what has to go into each task. So you'll have your context for learning, you'll put in your lesson plans, any instructional materials. Now, instructional materials are things like, if you had a PowerPoint in Kevin's social studies class, you put that in there. Except, I'll tell you now, and I'll probably come up with it later. Strangely enough, PowerPoint is not one of the formats supported by the TPA.
Oh, my.
So what you have to do with anything that's PowerPoint, and do the same thing if you have Smart Notebook lessons. They can't read those either. What you need to do is just go under PowerPoint, do a save as, and save it as a PDF. That's how they want you to save it. If you have a Smart Notebook file, I think you might have to save it as a PowerPoint and then open the PowerPoint to save it as a PDF. I'm not sure you can go directly to PDF from Smart Notebook. I'd have to check that. But at any rate, they can't do Smart Notebook files. They can't do PowerPoint files. Right? I don't know why they can't do a PowerPoint, but they don't. So make sure you turn them into a PDF. So, yeah.
They gotta understand, because me being in social sciences, PowerPoint's like the best way for me to point across.
Yeah.
Right.
And like when they're gonna use slides, there're gonna be a lot of information on there, but I use transitions so it comes up one at a time, or else you can't have all that information at once. So I don't want them
Right.
to think I'm throwing all that information at the students at
Exactly.
once.
And that's why I'd rather them see the PowerPoint so they can see that you're doing this.
Okay.
But for whatever reason, at least right now, their platform doesn't support that. I don't get it. PowerPoint's been around for forever, but it's the way it is. So I just tell you that now. I ran into that fall semester when I had people trying to upload that and it kept rejecting it. We were like, yeah, why not? Well, if you go back and look in the details on what files are supported, turns out that's not one of them. So, let's see. Other instructional materials, if you have, maybe you don't have a smart board, you got an overhead. You got transparency that you're using, run a copy of that. And you know, or you got it on a Word document, scan it in, whichever. You do not need to do teacher editions, any of that kind of stuff, or the student workbooks, any of that sort of stuff. Really, this is more things you use in your teaching that you're presenting to students. So that's kind of the main idea. So
I have another question on that then. What is on my smart board is the worksheet that we're working on. It's a Venn diagram and then writing with it. So I don't
Yeah.
need to download the smart board part with it because that's on their examples. I'm using it for their work samples.
right.
So I won't have to,
So then
oh,
you don't
okay.
have to worry
Good,
about
good.
that. Right.
Okay.
Shelley?
Well, I'm just trying to make sure Life of Pi is my text.
Okay.
So I don't need to just include the publisher and the,
Right, just in the lesson
that
plan, you know, say we're
information.
doing the Life of Pi and we're using this, you know, this edition and, yeah.
okay.
So, yeah, you should be fine there. It's just we have seen, and I've seen this more in scoring at the national level. I had one time that was 300 pages because they'd scanned in the entire chapter of the teacher's edition, which had, you know, multiple extra pages of stuff. And it's, I mean, you got to go through it till you get to the stuff you need, you know? It's painful. You don't want your scorer thinking painful thoughts while they're scoring your stuff. So, you know, give them what they need. Here's what I showed the students, that kind of stuff. And then you're going to have a commentary with each of these. That's your chance to tell, here's what happened. And any of the details, things that you're going to let them know, here's what happened before, here's what happened after. They're going to ask you questions all the way through. Probably my biggest tip I can give you, and I try to get people to do this. When you're completing the commentary, please pull up the rubrics along with the commentary. Because what the scorers are told to do is look in certain places for the answers that you're putting in the commentary. If you look at the rubrics, you'll know what they're looking for. So you can make sure you're including this in there. And I've told people, feel free to use the language of the rubrics, okay? So one of them in math is all about that the students know about procedures and content, or concepts and understanding. So I can say, I was working on understanding and procedural knowledge when I did this part. So now, I as a scorer know me as the person doing it, but know the person, here's where they saw that. I'm not guessing here's where they think they did it, or I'm not entirely sure looking. You're telling them, here's where I was working on this part. So have the rubrics right up there next to your commentary so that you can see what they're looking for. It's in bullet points right on there, and you can make sure that you just use this to guide them. It makes it so much easier for the scorers if you just lay it out there so they can see, here's where things are at. So, make it easy. Instruction, you have video clips. It is actually different by different content areas about what your requirements for that are. So I'm going to pick on Liz now because she's science. I believe in science you have to have 2 clips, and one has to be a lab, or them working with something. Where obviously, you know, math, no. Some of them let you do a straight 20-minute. I know science, you have to break it down. Questions I've gotten on this, do you have to have a full 20 minutes? What if you only have 16? What do you think? Yeah, no. You can't go over 20? What
thought
the
it was
scorers are
15.
told is if your video is more than 20 minutes, they stop watching at 20, period. They can't use anything as evidence after that 20 minutes, okay? But yeah, if yours is 12 minutes, but you got what you need on there, fine, okay? Same thing, if they tell you you have, you know, you can do 6 pages for something, you don't have to use all 6, but make sure you have what you need in there, so.
Is it worth including if we give all the instructions and then have, you know, independent work time? Is it worth showing that when we walk around and make sure everybody's meeting their needs, or is that a good?
You know, a little bit of it, because some of the rubrics talk about you engaging students and feedback to students.
Mhm.
So you working one-on-one with students is a good thing to show. I have seen some where that's all I saw. They gave instructions and then they walked around the room. Okay, well, I didn't get anything in scoring. I couldn't really say anything about feedback, you know, engagement to students. Were you answering questions in class, and how were you addressing things? Because I can't hear what you were doing with the one-on-one students, right, on the videotape. So for most of you, you can do 2 clips. You can't edit them in any way other than shortening or, you know, how long. You can't transitions or any fun stuff. But you might, I would say mix it a little bit, some of you doing whole class instruction, some of you doing maybe more individual things, because that way they know this happens. I mean, we assume it does, but it's good to kind of be able to tell, so.
Then I have another question.
Okay.
If I have two clips, so I do maybe a large group literacy and then I do a small group guided reading,
Mhm.
could it back the count on the second video clip if
Right.
it's just me doing guided reading
Right.
with 6 kids?
And they don't have to be from the same day's lesson, they just have to be from the lessons within your learning event, your 3 to 5 days, okay? Another question I get a lot is, does my work samples have to be from the day I videotaped? No, they just have to be from that 3 to 5 day event, okay? So, yep.
What if you're kind of doing things like a flipped classroom, you know, where you're not standing in front of the class and doing a lot of teaching?
Yep.
You do more of like,
Hands-on and.
yeah.
Yep, and then I would make sure they're clear on that in your context. And I'd probably remind them occasionally on the way through. It's like, you know, because we're doing the flipped classroom,
Mhm.
they watched this at home last night, so now we're working on this in the class.
But like if I would make a video of, you know, me teaching something and that's what the students watch at home,
Mhm.
that's included in my,
Your instructional.
Planning?
That would be your
okay.
instructional materials. Yeah. Now, that's my question, is I'm wondering, because they're so picky about what types of file types, I'm not sure you can upload a video in the instructional materials.
Okay.
Is it posted online with the school or anything like that? How do
Usually do
students
like
get
through like
access?
YouTube. Like,
Okay, so you could do that. You could put a Word document in there and say, you know, here's the video, and put a link to the YouTube where it's posted, and let them know which one to look at.
okay.
That would work, because I know we've run into some of this, okay, that what I'm looking for is not what they'll let me upload issue,
Mhm.
but that would take care of that one now.
Okay.
So, okay, other, yeah.
I'm just double checking about the video, because I'm in 5th grade, and the other 5th grade is also a student teacher, but from a different school, different college.
Interesting.
It is. It's really been kind of nice. But anyway, she was told at her college at Moorhead it had to be all one video.
Oh, no,
Now,
that's-
mine ended up being in 4 different clips. Is that going to be okay or not?
I think you can only use 2 clips.
2 clips, okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they won't let you take, you know, 4 pieces. It could be
Okay.
2 clips, 1 clip or 2.
Okay,
Has to no more than 20 minutes.
right, okay.
Read your handbook, because like I said, it is specific
Yeah.
to certain handbooks.
Okay.
So people not with us in the viewing audience today,
Uh-huh.
PE, art, music, all have separate requirements there. So that's why I say you have to read your handbook, and specifically in the task 2 is where you're gonna find the requirements for your video. Depends on what area you're in. Okay, last part here. Oh, and actually part 3 ties to part 1 here, and they don't mention it so much right here. Task 3 is where you're gonna do some analysis of the student learning. One of the things they want with your lesson plan in task 1 is they want a blank copy of whatever you're using to assess the student's learning. So, like Joan was mentioning, she had the worksheet, and it was part of the smartboard thing she did. You're gonna wanna put a blank copy of that with your task 1, and there's actually a slot for it now when you upload things into Pearson, not in TPA, but in Pearson. And then you're gonna do copies. You need 3 student samples for what you turn in here. You have to do an analysis of the whole class, but you only have to turn in 3 samples. Okay, and basically what they want for the 3 samples, they would love to see an ESL student, an IEP student, and, you know, then one of your high flyers. Like I said, if you don't have those, choose a low, medium, high. They just want to see the differentiation in your classroom, so that's what you go with, okay? Because, yeah, we still got a lot of schools that not every classroom has, you know, somebody with that letters after their name, so, yes.
So for the math curriculum that we use, there is, at the end of the day, like just a worksheet that assesses the things we're doing all week. Okay, so then on day 5, we do a formal assessment, that's it, it's just assessment day. So would I include every single one through the week and then the final assessment, or just that final
You
assessment?
just pick one. It can be any one of the days. I have seen exit tickets with 3 questions score really well. It isn't so much how long is the assessment and how much does it encompass. The biggest things you're going to want to do, and we'll talk a little bit more about when we get there, is really tie whatever's on your assessment back to your standards and tie it back to your learning objectives. What sometimes people do is they use just what's in the book, but the books aren't written for Minnesota standards, they're written for, you know, big states. So what's on that worksheet, there might only be 2 or 3 questions that actually tie into what was on your event. There might be review questions and other stuff. That's the piece you need to identify. These are the 4 questions that tied right back into what this